The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest, but I kept my face stone still. "You're just trash that needs to be thrown away." Arden's voice carried across the living room, loud enough for all 6 of her friends to hear every syllable. They sat frozen on my parents' old furniture, wine glasses halfway to their lips, watching this domestic theater unfold. I looked at my wife of 15 years standing there in her expensive blazer, pointing at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Her friends, the usual suspects from her law firm's social circle, had gone quiet. Real quiet. The kind of silence that happens when someone crosses a line they can't uncross. "We'll see who gets thrown out," I said, keeping my voice level as a carpenter's square. I reached for my phone on the coffee table, moving slow and deliberate. Arden thought she had me cornered, thought she could humiliate me in front of her audience. She always did love an audience when she was destroying someone. Made her feel powerful, I guess. Made her feel like the successful lawyer she'd worked so hard to become, instead of the small-town girl who'd married beneath her station. The thing is, Arden had forgotten something important. This house, the 3-bedroom colonial with the wraparound porch and the oak trees my grandfather planted, didn't belong to her. Never had. Her name wasn't on the deed, wasn't on the mortgage, wasn't on anything except the utility bills I'd put in her name to make her feel important. I walked to the kitchen, my work boots heavy on the hardwood floors my father had refinished 20 years ago. Behind me, I could hear Arden telling her friends how I was just being dramatic, how I always threw little tantrums when I didn't get my way. Classic Arden, rewriting history while it was still happening. The kitchen drawer stuck like it always did. Inside, underneath the takeout menus and rubber bands, sat the manila folder with the property deed. My father had kept copies of everything important in that drawer. Smart man, my father. Smarter than his son, who'd spent 15 years thinking love could bridge the gap between blue-collar and white-collar. I dialed 911, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Hi, I need police assistance for a trespassing situation. I have a guest who's refusing to leave my private residence." I gave them the address, spelled out my name, Beck Derron, and mentioned my parents' names for good measure. The dispatcher asked if anyone was in immediate danger. I looked through the kitchen doorway at Arden, who was now pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly, while her friends watched like they were at a tennis match. "No immediate danger," I said. "Just someone who needs to be escorted off the property." I hung up and walked back to the living room. Arden's friend Melissa, a paralegal with too much makeup and not enough sense, was whispering something about how I wouldn't really call the police on my own wife. Another friend, Janet, was checking her phone, probably texting her husband about the drama she was witnessing. "You're bluffing," Arden said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "You can't just throw me out of my own house." I sat back down on the couch, right where I'd been when she started her little performance. The deed was in my lap now, along with my driver's license and the spare key to the front door. Physical evidence, the kind that holds up in court, which Arden should have remembered, being a lawyer and all. "Your house?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Show me the paperwork." That's when her friends started shifting in their seats. Melissa put down her wine glass. Janet stopped texting. Even Celine, Arden's best friend and biggest enabler, looked uncomfortable. They were all smart enough to realize that maybe they didn't know the whole story. Arden's face went red, then white, then red again. "Don't be ridiculous, Beck. We've been married 15 years. This is our home." "My parents' home," I corrected, "which they left to me when they passed. You remember the funeral, right? You wore that black dress you bought special for the occasion?" The cruelty in my voice surprised even me. But 15 years of being treated like hired help in my own house had built up some pressure. Tonight, with her calling me trash in front of her friends, the valve had finally opened. Car doors slammed outside. Blue and red lights painted the living room walls in shifting colors. Arden's eyes went wide, like she'd just realized this wasn't a game anymore. "You actually called them," she whispered. "I don't bluff," I said, standing up as the doorbell rang. Two officers stood on the porch, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and an older woman with sergeant stripes who'd probably seen this exact scene 100 times before. I opened the door wide, letting the cool October air sweep into the house. "Evening, officers. I'm Beck Derron. I called about the trespassing situation." The sergeant looked past me into the living room, taking in the scene: 6 women in business attire holding wine glasses, 1 man in work clothes holding legal documents, and enough tension to power the neighborhood. "Sir, can you explain the situation?" she asked. I handed her my driver's license and the deed. "This is my house, inherited from my parents. My wife and I are separated, and she's refusing to leave the property. She doesn't live here anymore." Arden pushed past me onto the porch. "That's not true. This is my home too. We're married." The sergeant examined the documents while the younger officer took notes. "Ma'am, is your name on any of these ownership papers?" "Well, no, but do you have any legal right to be in this residence?" Arden looked back at her friends, who were all suddenly very interested in their wine. No help there. "We're married," she repeated, like that was some kind of magic word. "Marriage doesn't automatically grant property rights," the sergeant said patiently. "Sir, do you want to press trespassing charges?" I considered it, really considered it, but pressing charges would mean paperwork, court dates, lawyers. It would mean dragging this out for months. I had a better idea. "Not if she leaves voluntarily," I said. The sergeant turned back to Arden. "Ma'am, you need to gather your belongings and leave the property. If you return without permission, you can be arrested for trespassing." "This is insane," Arden's voice cracked. "Beck, you can't do this. Where am I supposed to go?" I looked at her standing there on the porch, and for just a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. 15 years of marriage, and it had come to this. Police lights and legal documents and her friends watching through the window like it was reality television. But then, I remembered what she'd called me. Trash. In front of her friends. Like I was something disposable, something that had outlived its usefulness. "That's not my problem anymore," I said. The officers waited while Arden went upstairs to pack a bag. Her friends sat in uncomfortable silence, probably wondering if they should leave or stay or pretend this wasn't happening. I decided to make it easy for them. "Anyone want another drink?" I asked, walking to the kitchen. "I'm thinking of ordering pizza." When I came back with a fresh beer, Melissa was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're really going to make her leave?" "She made her choice when she called me trash," I said. "Actions have consequences." Arden came back downstairs with a suitcase and her laptop bag, her face streaked with tears. She looked at her friends, waiting for someone to offer her a place to stay, someone to take her side. But they all found reasons to look elsewhere. "This isn't over," she said to me. "Yes, it is," I replied. The officers escorted her to her car, a silver BMW that cost more than I made in 6 months. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time, engine running, probably calling people on her phone, probably realizing that most of those people were sitting in my living room, eating my pizza. Through the window, I watched her finally drive away, taillights disappearing around the corner. The police followed to make sure she actually left. And then it was just me and 5 very uncomfortable women in expensive clothes. "So," I said, settling back onto the couch, "who wants to tell me what else my wife has been saying about me behind my back?" The silence stretched out like taffy. These women had been coming to my house for years, drinking my beer, eating my food, and apparently listening to Arden tear me apart when I wasn't around. Now they were stuck, caught between loyalty to their friend and the uncomfortable reality that they were guests in my house. Janet cleared her throat. "Beck, maybe we should go." "Why?" I asked. "The party's just getting started. Besides, I ordered enough pizza for everyone." Celine, who'd been quiet this whole time, finally spoke up. You really threw her out, your own wife. My wife threw herself out the minute she decided I was trash, I said. I just made it official. The pizza arrived 20 minutes later. 3 large pies from Tony's, the place Arden always said was too greasy for civilized people. I paid the delivery guy and set the boxes on the coffee table, right where the legal documents had been. Dig in, I said, and here's the thing that surprised me. They did. All 5 of them. Even Celine, who usually acted like eating carbs was a moral failing. They ate my pizza and drank my beer and slowly, carefully, started talking. About how Arden had been different lately. More critical, more angry, more focused on what was wrong with everyone instead of what was right. About how she'd been working late more often, coming home in strange moods, talking about making changes in her life. About how maybe, just maybe, calling me trash in front of everyone had been a long time coming. I listened to it all, filing away every detail, because if 15 years of marriage had taught me anything, it was that information was power. And if Arden wanted to play games, I was going to make sure I knew all the rules. By the time her friends left, it was past midnight. They filed out quietly, some of them actually apologizing for the scene, others just looking confused about what they'd witnessed. Melissa lingered at the door. For what it's worth, she said, I never thought you were trash. Thanks, I said. That means something. After they left, I cleaned up the pizza boxes and beer bottles, wiped down the counters, and locked the doors. The house felt different now, bigger somehow, like it had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. I walked through the rooms, looking at everything with new eyes. The furniture Arden had insisted on buying, the artwork she'd chosen, the decorative touches that had never felt like me. It was all still there, but it felt temporary now, like props in a play that was finally ending. In the bedroom, I opened Arden's closet and looked at the clothes she'd left behind. Expensive suits, designer shoes, jewelry that cost more than my truck. She'd taken 1 suitcase worth of stuff, leaving behind a life's worth of accumulation. I wondered where she'd gone. Probably to Celine's place, or maybe a hotel. Somewhere she could regroup and plan her next move. Because there would be a next move. I knew Arden well enough to be sure of that. She didn't give up easily, and she definitely didn't lose gracefully. But for tonight, the house was mine. Really mine. For the first time in 15 years. I could eat pizza in the living room, drink beer from the bottle, watch whatever I wanted on television. I could be trash if I wanted to be. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. The next morning brought clarity and coffee, both equally bitter. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, doing what any reasonable person would do after their spouse called them trash in front of witnesses. I started looking for evidence of why. Arden had left her tablet on the nightstand, probably forgotten in the chaos of packing. A silver iPad with a cracked screen that she'd been meaning to replace for months. I knew her password, our wedding anniversary, because Arden wasn't nearly as clever as she thought she was. What I found in her messages made my coffee taste like ash. The group chat was called Wine and Wine, which should have been my first clue. Arden, Celine, Melissa, Janet, and 2 other women from the law firm, all sharing the intimate details of their lives like teenagers passing notes in study hall. Except, these notes were about me. Beck was in one of his moods again last night. Arden had written 3 weeks ago. Sitting in that stupid recliner, watching sports, drinking cheap beer. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm married to a caveman. The responses were a chorus of sympathy and encouragement. Poor Arden, stuck with such an unsophisticated husband. Poor Arden, who deserved so much better than a blue-collar nobody. I scrolled back further, months of messages painting a picture I barely recognized. According to Arden's version of events, I was lazy, crude, embarrassing at social functions, and completely lacking in ambition. I was holding her back from the life she deserved, the life she'd worked so hard to build. But the real knife in the gut came when I found the photos, Pictures of Arden with a man I recognized from her office Christmas parties. Mitch Carrow, one of the senior partners at her firm. They were in what looked like a hotel room, and they definitely weren't discussing legal briefs. The timestamps showed the photos were taken last Tuesday, when Arden had told me she was working late on a difficult case. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more messages. Arden describing her afternoon with Mitch in detail that would make a sailor blush. Her friends cheering her on, telling her she deserved to be happy, that she shouldn't feel guilty about finding someone who appreciated her properly. Mitch makes me feel like a woman again, she'd written. Not just some man's wife who's supposed to be grateful for scraps. Scraps. 15 years of marriage, and that's what I'd been giving her. Scraps. The worst part wasn't the affair itself, though that stung plenty. The worst part was reading how little respect she had for me, how completely she'd rewritten our history to justify her choices. In Arden's version, I was the villain who'd trapped her in a mediocre life. She was just the victim, finally finding the courage to reach for something better. I closed the tablet and sat back in my chair, staring out the kitchen window at the oak trees my grandfather had planted. Those trees had weathered ice storms and hurricanes, drought and disease. They'd bent, but never broken, adapting to whatever nature threw at them. Maybe it was time I learned something from those trees. My phone buzzed with a text from Wheels, Drew Wheeler, my best friend since high school, and the only person who'd never treated me like I needed improvement. Heard about last night. You okay? I texted back. Define okay. Bar, 1 hour. I'll buy the first round. Wheels owned a small auto repair shop on the edge of town, the kind of place where honest work still meant something. He'd been married and divorced twice, both times to women who thought they could change him into someone more respectable. He'd learned the hard way that some people love the idea of you more than they love the actual you. The Rusty Anchor hadn't changed much since we'd started drinking there 20 years ago. Same scarred wooden bar, same neon beer signs, same smell of cigarettes and broken dreams. It was the kind of place Arden called depressing, which had always made me like it more. Wheels was already there, nursing a beer and talking to Mickey, the bartender who'd been serving drinks since before we were legal to drink them. They both looked up when I walked in, and I could see the questions in their eyes. She really called you trash? Wheels asked without preamble. In front of her whole crew, I confirmed, sliding onto the bar stool next to him, then acted surprised when I had her escorted off the property. Mickey set a beer in front of me without being asked. Heard her friends stayed for pizza. News traveled fast in a town this size. By now, half the population probably knew about last night's drama. The other half would know by dinner time. They did, I said. Turns out they had some interesting things to say about my wife's recent behavior. Wheels raised an eyebrow. Such as? I told them about the messages, the affair, the months of mockery disguised as marriage. With each detail, Wheels' expression grew darker and Mickey's jaw got tighter. These weren't sophisticated men, but they understood loyalty, they understood respect, and they understood that what Arden had done crossed every line that mattered. So what's your play? Wheels asked when I finished. I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to pretend none of this happened, go back to being the dumb husband who doesn't notice anything. And the other part? I took a long pull from my beer, tasting the cheap grain and artificial carbonation that Arden had always criticized. The other part wants to show her what trash really looks like when it stops playing nice. Mickey wiped down a glass that was already clean. You know, Beck, I've seen a lot of marriages come and go in this place. The ones that end ugly usually start ugly, but the ones that end with real damage, those start with disrespect. Meaning she didn't just cheat on you. She made you into a joke, made your marriage into a joke. That's not something you can forgive your way out of. Wheels nodded. Mickey's right. This isn't about the affair, Beck. This is about her thinking she's better than you, thinking you're disposable. I thought about that word. Disposable. Like trash that had outlived its usefulness. like something you could throw away without a second thought. Maybe I am disposable, I said. Maybe she's right about everything. Maybe I am just some blue-collar nobody who got lucky when she married me. Wheels slammed his beer down hard enough to make the bar shake. Don't you dare! Don't you dare let her rewrite who you are. Look around, Wheels. Look at this place. Look at us. We're exactly what she says we are. So what? Mickey interjected. You think being honest working men makes you less than her and her fancy lawyer friends? You think wearing a suit to work makes someone better than wearing work boots? She does. Then she's wrong, Wheels said firmly. And maybe it's time someone showed her just how wrong she is. I stared into my beer, watching the bubbles rise to the surface and disappear. 15 years ago, I'd thought love could bridge any gap. I'd thought that if I worked hard enough, provided well enough, loved completely enough, the differences between us wouldn't matter. But love isn't a bridge when only one person is trying to cross it. Love isn't enough when the other person sees you as a project to be improved rather than a partner to be cherished. You know what the funny thing is? I said. I actually believed her for a while. Started thinking maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I needed to change. Maybe I was holding her back. And now? Now I'm thinking maybe she's the one who needs to change. Maybe she needs to learn what it feels like to be treated like trash. Wheels grinned, and it wasn't a nice expression. Now you're talking. What do you need? Over the next 2 hours we planned. Not anything illegal, nothing that would get me arrested or sued. But Arden wanted to play games with my reputation, my self-respect, my place in this town. She wanted to make me the villain in her story of personal growth and liberation. Fine, I could be a villain. But I was going to be the kind of villain who won. The first step was information. I needed to know everything about her affair with Mitch, everything about their plans, everything about the life she was trying to build without me. Knowledge was power, and I'd been powerless long enough. The second step was patience. Arden expected me to react like a wounded animal, lashing out blindly and giving her ammunition for the divorce proceedings that were surely coming. Instead, I was going to be calm, methodical, strategic. I was going to let her dig her own grave. The third step was making sure everyone in town knew exactly who Arden really was. Not the successful lawyer with the disappointing husband, but the cheating wife who'd thrown away a good marriage for a few hours in a hotel room. You sure about this? Wheels asked as we prepared to leave. Once you start down this road, there's no going back. I thought about Arden's messages, her friends laughing at my expense, the casual cruelty of calling me trash in my own home. I thought about 15 years of trying to be good enough for someone who would never see me as anything more than a stepping stone to something better. I'm sure, I said. She wants to throw me away like trash? Fine, but she's going to learn that sometimes the trash fights back. Outside the bar, the October air was crisp and clean. Leaves were starting to turn, painting the town in shades of gold and crimson. Change was coming whether I wanted it or not. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I had some control over what that change would look like. Arden had started this war when she decided I was disposable. Now it was time to finish it, and I was going to make sure she remembered this lesson for the rest of her life. The plan started simple enough: gather intelligence, document everything, and let Arden's own actions provide the ammunition for her downfall. What I hadn't counted on was how much ammunition she'd already given me. Her laptop was still in the house, sitting on the desk in what used to be our shared office. Password protected, but Arden had always been predictable. After 3 tries, our anniversary, her birthday, her mother's maiden name, I was in. What I found made the tablet messages look like love letters. Email after email with Mitch Carrow, planning their future together. Not just the affair, but actual plans. They'd been looking at apartments in the city, discussing which of her friends would understand their relationship, even shopping for furniture online. Arden had been building a whole new life, and I was apparently the only obstacle left to remove. Beck is getting suspicious, she'd written just last week. He asked about the hotel charges on the credit card. I told him it was for a client dinner, but I don't think he believed me. Mitch's response was everything I needed to know about his character. Don't worry about Beck. Guys like him don't have the spine to actually do anything. He'll whine and complain, but he won't leave. He needs you more than you need him. Guys like him. Apparently, I was a type, the disposable husband who'd be grateful for whatever scraps of affection he could get. I printed everything, every email, every message, every photo. Then I copied it all to a secure cloud account and a USB drive. If Arden wanted to play the victim when this all came out, she was going to have a hard time explaining away her own words. But evidence was only half the battle. The other half was making sure the right people saw it. I started with her workplace. Mitch might think he was untouchable as a senior partner, but law firms cared about their reputations. A partner having an affair with a junior associate's wife would be embarrassing enough. A partner stupid enough to put it all in writing would be a liability. I didn't send the emails directly to the managing partner. That would have been too obvious, too traceable. Instead, I created an anonymous email account and sent copies to the firm's HR department, along with a note expressing concern about the professional conduct of senior staff. Then I waited. The call came 2 days later, Arden, hysterical and angry, demanding to know what I'd done. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Don't play dumb, Beck. Someone sent my private emails to my boss. Someone's trying to destroy my career." "That's terrible," I said. "Who would do something like that?" "You! It had to be you!" "How would I get your private emails? And why would I want to hurt your career? I'm not the one who called you trash in front of your friends." The silence on the other end told me she was thinking, trying to figure out how I could have accessed her messages. She'd taken the tablet with her when she left, and as far as she knew, I didn't have her passwords. "This isn't over," she finally said. "I hope not," I replied. "I'd hate for our marriage to end on such an ugly note." But it was just getting started. The next phase required more finesse. Arden's social circle was tight-knit and fiercely loyal, at least on the surface. But like any group of ambitious people, they were also competitive and prone to gossip. The trick was giving them something worth gossiping about. I started with Melissa, the paralegal who'd stayed for pizza. She worked at a different firm, but moved in the same social circles as Arden. More importantly, she'd always been a little jealous of Arden's success and her seemingly perfect marriage. I ran into her at the grocery store, purely by coincidence. Or at least, that's how I made it look. "Beck," she said, seeming genuinely surprised to see me. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I said, putting on my best wounded but brave expression. "It's been hard, finding out about the affair and everything." Her eyes widened. "Affair?" I looked around as if checking to make sure no one could overhear. "You didn't know? You're all so close, I figured Arden would have told you about Mitch." "Mitch Carrow? From her firm?" I nodded sadly. "They've been seeing each other for months. I found all their messages, their plans to move in together. I guess that's why she was so eager to get me out of the house." Melissa's expression went through several stages: shock, disbelief, and then something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "I can't believe she didn't tell us." "Maybe she was ashamed," I suggested. "Or maybe she thought you wouldn't approve of her cheating on her husband." "Of course we wouldn't approve," Melissa said quickly. "We're not monsters." But I could see the wheels turning in her head. Arden had kept secrets from her friends, had lied to them about why our marriage was ending. That was a betrayal in itself, and Melissa was exactly the type to take it personally. "I probably shouldn't have said anything," I added, "but I thought you knew. I thought everyone knew." "No, She told us you two were having problems, but she never mentioned anyone else. I shrugged, playing the role of the confused, hurt husband. I guess she wanted to control the narrative, make it look like I was the problem. That conversation lasted another 10 minutes, but the damage was done. By the end of the week, Arden's entire social circle would know about the affair. More importantly, they'd know she'd lied to them about it. The third phase was more direct. If Arden wanted to play the victim, she needed a villain. And if I was going to be the villain anyway, I might as well earn the title. I waited until Thursday night, when I knew she'd be at her weekly book club meeting. The same book club where she'd probably been complaining about me for months, painting herself as the long-suffering wife of an inadequate man. The meeting was at Janet's house, a colonial similar to mine, but newer and more expensive. I parked across the street and waited until I saw Arden's BMW in the driveway, along with 4 other cars I recognized. Then I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Janet answered, looking surprised and uncomfortable. "Beck? What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to Arden," I said. "It's important." "This isn't really a good time." "It's about Mitch," I said, loud enough for the women inside to hear. Janet's face went pale. "Maybe you should call her instead." I tried. She's not answering, but since her friends are here, maybe they can help me understand something. I pushed past Janet into the living room, where 5 women sat in a circle with books in their laps and wine glasses in their hands. They all looked up at me like I was a wild animal that had wandered into their civilized gathering. "Beck," Arden said, standing up quickly, "you can't just barge in here." "Can't I? I'm sorry. I thought we were still married. I thought that gave me some rights. What do you want?" I looked around the room, meeting each woman's eyes. "I want to understand something. When did you all decide it was okay for Arden to cheat on me?" The silence was deafening. Celine shifted in her chair, avoiding my gaze. Melissa stared at her book like it contained the secrets of the universe. Janet looked like she wanted to disappear into the furniture. "That's not," Arden started. "Because I found all the messages," I continued. "All the emails with Mitch, all the plans you've been making. And I'm wondering if your friends knew about it. If they were helping you plan your new life while I was at home, thinking we were working through a rough patch." "Get out," Arden said, her voice shaking with anger. "Or what? You'll call me trash again? You'll have me thrown out of someone else's house?" I pulled out my phone and started reading from the screenshots I'd saved. Mitch makes me feel like a woman again, not just some man's wife who's supposed to be grateful for scraps. "Stop it," Arden whispered. Beck was in one of his moods again last night, sitting in that stupid recliner, watching sports, drinking cheap beer. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm married to a caveman. The women in the room were looking everywhere except at me or Arden. This wasn't the version of events they'd been hearing. This wasn't the story of the successful woman trapped in a loveless marriage. "You want to know what I think?" I said, putting my phone away. "I think you've been lying to everyone, including yourself. I think you decided you were too good for me and went looking for someone who'd tell you what you wanted to hear." "That's not true," Arden said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then explain the hotel receipts. Explain the apartment listings you've been sharing with Mitch. Explain why you've been planning a future that doesn't include your husband." I looked around the room one more time. "Ladies, enjoy your book club. Arden, when you're ready to have an honest conversation about our marriage, you know where to find me." I walked out, leaving behind a room full of uncomfortable silence and shattered illusions. By tomorrow, everyone in their social circle would know the truth. Arden's reputation as the wronged wife would be in ruins, and her friends would be questioning everything she'd told them. But the real satisfaction came 3 days later, when I got a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Derron, this is Patricia Hawkins from Hawkins, Burke & Associates. I understand you might be in need of legal representation." "Maybe," I said. "Depends on what kind of representation you're talking about." Divorce proceedings. I specialize in cases involving adultery and asset protection. I've been following your wife's situation with some interest. My wife's situation? Her affair with Mitch Carrow has become quite the topic of conversation in legal circles. Apparently, their firm is conducting an internal investigation. There are rumors about misappropriated client funds, inappropriate use of company resources, that sort of thing. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. That sounds serious. It is, and it could be very beneficial for your case. Are you interested in discussing your options? Very interested, I said. As I hung up the phone, I realized something had changed in me over the past week. The man who'd sat quietly while his wife called him trash was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, more strategic. Someone who understood that in a war, the first casualty was always the truth. And in this war, I was done being a casualty. Arden had wanted to throw me away like trash, but she'd forgotten that sometimes, when you try to throw something away, it comes back to haunt you, and I was just getting started. The law office of Patricia Hawkins looked exactly like what it was, a place where marriages went to die professionally. Clean lines, neutral colors, and the kind of expensive furniture that said, "This is going to cost you, but you'll get your money's worth." Patricia herself was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd built her reputation on high-stakes divorce cases, the kind where millions of dollars and reputations hung in the balance. "Mr. Derron," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "Thank you for coming in. I've reviewed the materials you sent, and I have to say, your wife made this remarkably easy for us." She opened a thick folder and spread out copies of the emails and messages I'd provided. Documented adultery, evidence of planning to abandon the marriage, and, this is particularly interesting, what appears to be conspiracy to commit fraud. Fraud. These emails between your wife and Mr. Carrow discuss using firm resources for personal matters. Client funds being diverted, company credit cards used for their hotel stays, that sort of thing. The firm's investigation has apparently uncovered quite a bit. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. How much trouble are they in? Professionally? Career-ending trouble. Mr. Carrow has already been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Your wife is likely to face similar consequences. And personally? Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a warm expression. That depends on how aggressive we want to be. With this evidence, we can pursue a fault-based divorce, which means your wife gets significantly less in the settlement. We can also seek damages for emotional distress, alienation of affection, and breach of fiduciary duty. Meaning we can take her for everything she's worth and then some. I thought about that for a moment. A week ago, I would have been horrified by the idea of destroying Arden's life so completely. But a week ago, I still thought our marriage was worth saving. What would you recommend? Scorched earth, Patricia said without hesitation. Your wife has spent months planning to leave you with nothing while building a new life with her lover. She's shown no remorse, no attempt at reconciliation, no respect for your marriage or your feelings. She called you trash in front of witnesses. She did. Then we treat her like the trash she is. We hit her with everything we have, and we make sure everyone knows exactly who she really is. Over the next hour, Patricia laid out a strategy that was both elegant and brutal. We would file for divorce on grounds of adultery, seeking full custody of any shared assets and maximum damages. We would subpoena her work emails, her phone records, her financial statements. We would depose her friends, her colleagues, anyone who might have knowledge of the affair. But the real genius was in the timing. Instead of filing immediately, we would wait until after the firm's investigation concluded. Let Arden think she was safe. Let her believe she'd gotten away with everything. Then, when her professional life was already in ruins, we'd destroy what was left of her personal life. One more thing, Patricia said as our meeting concluded. I understand your wife has been staying with her friend Celine? That's what I heard. Interesting. Celine Marks, correct? The real estate agent? Yes, why? Patricia's smile grew wider. Because Celine Marks is married to Judge Robert Marks, and Judge Marks is currently presiding over a case involving Mr. Carrow's firm. Harboring someone involved in an ongoing investigation could be seen as an attempt to influence the proceedings. I stared at her. I'm saying your wife's choice of refuge might have just given us another angle to pursue. Judge Marks will have to recuse himself from the case, which will delay the proceedings and make everyone involved look suspicious. It's guilt by association, but sometimes that's enough. As I left Patricia's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: power. For the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't reacting to Arden's moves. I was making moves of my own. The next few days passed quietly. Too quietly. I knew Arden was planning something, probably with the help of her own lawyer. She wasn't the type to go down without a fight, and she definitely wasn't the type to accept blame for anything. The attack came on Friday afternoon, delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Beck Derron? That's me. You've been served." The papers were exactly what I'd expected: a petition for divorce citing irreconcilable differences, a request for spousal support, and a motion for emergency relief claiming I'd been emotionally abusive and had unlawfully evicted her from the marital home. I read through the filing with growing amusement. According to Arden's version of events, I was a controlling, manipulative husband who'd used my ownership of the house to terrorize her into submission. The affair wasn't mentioned at all. Neither was her calling me trash in front of witnesses. She was trying to rewrite history again, casting herself as the victim and me as the aggressor. It might have worked if I hadn't been prepared. I called Patricia immediately. She filed first. I expected she would. "What are the grounds?" I read her the highlights, including Arden's claims of emotional abuse and unlawful eviction. "Interesting strategy," Patricia said. "She's trying to get ahead of the adultery allegations by painting you as the bad guy. Unfortunately for her, we have evidence that contradicts every claim she's making." "What's our next move?" "We file our counterpetition on Monday. Full documentation of the adultery, evidence of her planning to abandon the marriage, witness statements about her calling you trash. We turn her narrative inside out." "And the abuse allegations?" "We have her own messages calling you pathetic and weak. Hard to claim someone's abusive when you're simultaneously mocking them for being a pushover." That weekend, I prepared for war. Patricia had given me a list of witnesses to contact. People who'd been present when Arden made disparaging comments about me, friends who knew about the affair, colleagues who'd seen her behavior at work events. The responses were enlightening. Apparently, Arden's reputation wasn't as solid as she'd believed. Several people mentioned that they'd always found her cold and calculating. Others admitted they'd suspected something was going on with Mitch for months. Most interesting was the call from Tom Bradley, a junior partner at Arden's firm. "I probably shouldn't be talking to you," he said, "but what they did was wrong on so many levels." "What do you mean?" "The way they flaunted it around the office. The way they used company resources for their personal relationship. The way they talked about you." "They talked about me?" "Mitch used to joke about how you had no idea what was happening. Called you the mark like you were some kind of con game. Arden would laugh and say you were too stupid to figure it out." The mark. Like I was just some sucker to be played while they enjoyed themselves at my expense. "Would you be willing to testify about that?" I asked. "If it comes to that, yes. What they did was unprofessional and cruel. Someone should hold them accountable." By Sunday night, I had statements from 8 different people, all corroborating the same basic facts. Arden had been having an affair, she'd been openly disrespectful of our marriage, and she'd been planning to leave me long before our final confrontation. Monday morning, Patricia filed our response. It was a masterpiece of legal brutality, methodically dismantling every claim Arden had made while building an ironclad case for her fault in the marriage's dissolution. The reaction was swift and vicious. Arden called me at work, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "You lying piece of trash! How dare you drag my personal life into court?" "Your personal life?" I asked calmly. "You mean your affair? That's not what this is about, and you know it." "Actually, that's exactly what this is about. You cheated on me, planned to leave me, and called me trash in front of your friends. Now you want to claim I was abusive. Sorry, but the evidence doesn't support your story." "I'll destroy you," she hissed. "I'll take everything you have." "You already tried that," I said. "Now it's my turn." The call ended with her hanging up, but I knew it wasn't over. Arden was cornered now, and cornered animals were dangerous. She'd escalate, try something desperate to regain control of the narrative. I didn't have to wait long. Tuesday evening, I came home to find my front door standing open and my house ransacked. Furniture overturned, papers scattered, electronics missing. Someone had torn the place apart, either looking for something specific or just trying to send a message. I called the police, but I already knew who was responsible. The question was whether I could prove it. Detective Riley Monroe arrived within 20 minutes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who'd built a reputation for thorough investigations. She walked through the house, taking photos and notes, asking questions about what might be missing. "Any idea who might have done this?" she asked. "My wife," I said without hesitation. "We're going through a divorce, and she's not handling it well." "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence?" I showed her the divorce papers, explained about the affair and the ongoing legal battle. Detective Monroe listened without comment, but I could see her processing the information. "We'll dust for prints," she said finally. "Check for any security cameras in the neighborhood. But I have to ask, is there anything your wife might have been looking for specifically?" I thought about that. Arden knew I had copies of her emails and messages, but she'd taken her laptop and tablet when she left. What else could she want? Then it hit me. The safe in the bedroom closet, where I kept important documents and a small amount of cash. The safe that only Arden and I knew the combination to. "Follow me," I told Detective Monroe. The safe was open, its contents scattered across the closet floor. But nothing was missing. The cash was still there, along with our marriage certificate, birth certificates, and other important papers. "What was she looking for?" Detective Monroe asked. I knelt down and sifted through the papers, looking for what wasn't there. Then I found it. Or rather, didn't find it. "The USB drive," I said. "I had a backup drive with copies of all her emails and messages. It's gone." Detective Monroe raised an eyebrow. "Evidence in your divorce case?" "Evidence that proves she committed adultery and planned to abandon our marriage. Evidence that contradicts every claim she's made in court. And now it's missing. Now it's missing." But what Arden didn't know was that I'd learned from her mistakes. The USB drive she'd stolen was a decoy, loaded with old photos and meaningless documents. The real evidence was stored in multiple locations, including a safety deposit box at the bank. As Detective Monroe finished her investigation, I realized something important had changed. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about crime, breaking and entering, theft, possibly tampering with evidence. Arden had escalated beyond civil court into criminal territory, and that gave me options I hadn't had before. "Detective," I said as she prepared to leave, "what happens if we can prove my wife broke in here?" "Breaking and entering is a felony. If we can prove she did it, she'll face criminal charges in addition to whatever civil proceedings you have going on." "And if she stole evidence related to a court case?" "Tampering with evidence is another felony. She could be looking at serious jail time." As Detective Monroe drove away, I sat on my front porch and surveyed the damage to my house. Broken furniture, scattered papers, violated privacy. Arden had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, but she'd also made a critical error. In her desperation to destroy the evidence against her, she'd created new evidence of her own criminal behavior. The hunted had become the hunter, and I was just getting started. The security footage from my neighbor's doorbell camera was better than I dared hope. Clear, high-definition video of Arden using her key to enter my house at 2:17 p.m. on Tuesday, staying for 43 minutes, and leaving with a small bag that hadn't been in her hands when she arrived. Detective Monroe watched the footage twice before speaking. "That's definitely her?" "That's my wife," I confirmed. "And that's the bag she used to carry the stolen USB drive. We'll need to verify that the drive is actually missing, and that it contained what you claim it contained." I handed her a printed inventory of the safe's contents, dated and notarized the week before. I had everything documented after she moved out. The USB drive contained backup copies of emails and text messages relevant to our divorce proceedings. "And you can prove the contents of those messages?" I smiled. "I have copies stored in 3 other locations. The drive she stole was just one backup among many." Detective Monroe shook her head. "She broke into your house to steal evidence that you have copies of anyway?" "My wife isn't as smart as she thinks she is." The arrest warrant was issued Thursday morning. I wasn't there when they picked her up at Celine's house, but Wheels called me with a play-by-play he'd heard from his cousin who worked dispatch. "Apparently she tried to claim she still lived there and had a right to enter," Wheels said, barely containing his laughter. "The cops showed her the divorce papers and the security footage. She went from indignant to hysterical in about 30 seconds. Where is she now?" "County lockup. Bail hearing is this afternoon." I should have felt satisfaction, but all I felt was tired. This whole mess had spiraled so far beyond what either of us had intended. What started as a marriage falling apart had become a criminal case with real consequences. But Arden had made her choices. She'd chosen to cheat, chosen to lie, chosen to steal. Every step of the way, she'd had opportunities to handle things with dignity and respect. Instead, she doubled down on deception and escalation. The bail hearing was a circus. Arden's lawyer, a different one from the divorce case, argued that she was a respected member of the community with no prior criminal record. The prosecutor countered with evidence of planning and premeditation, pointing out that she'd waited until I was at work to break in and had specifically targeted evidence relevant to ongoing legal proceedings. Judge Martinez set bail at $50,000, with conditions including no contact with me and no access to the marital home. Arden's face went white when she heard the amount. Her legal bills were already mounting, and her career was effectively over. 50,000 might as well have been 50 million. She spent the night in jail. Patricia called me Friday morning with an update on the divorce proceedings. "The criminal charges have changed everything. Arden's lawyer is talking about a plea agreement that would include concessions in the divorce case." "What kind of concessions?" "Full admission of adultery, waiver of spousal support, agreement to an unequal division of assets in your favor. Essentially, she'd give you everything you want in exchange for not pursuing maximum criminal penalties." I thought about that. A week ago, I would have jumped at the chance to end this mess quickly and quietly. But something had hardened in me over the past few weeks. Arden had spent months planning to destroy my life, had called me trash in front of her friends, had broken into my house to steal evidence. What would maximum criminal penalties look like? 2 to 5 years for the breaking and entering, another 2 to 5 for evidence tampering. She could be looking at a decade in prison. And if we take the plea? Probably probation and community service. She keeps her freedom, but loses everything else. I stared out my office window at the town where I'd lived my entire life. The town where everyone now knew exactly what kind of person Arden really was. Where her reputation was in ruins and her career was over. "I want to think about it," I said. That evening I drove to the Rusty Anchor to clear my head. The bar was busier than usual for a Friday night, filled with people who'd been following the drama and wanted to hear the latest developments firsthand. Mickey greeted me with a knowing nod. "Heard your wife got herself arrested. News travels fast." "Small town," he said, setting a beer in front of me. "Everyone's talking about it. Most folks seem to think she got what she deserved. I looked around the bar at the faces I'd known for years. Blue-collar workers, small business owners, retirees who'd spent their lives building this community. These were my people, the ones Arden had looked down on as beneath her notice. You know what the funny thing is? I said to Mickey. She always said this place was full of losers and deadbeats. Said I was wasting my time with people who'd never amount to anything. And now? Now these same people are the ones supporting me while her fancy lawyer friends won't return her calls. Wheels appeared at my elbow, having materialized from somewhere in the crowd. Heard about the plea deal. You gonna take it? I don't know. Part of me wants to see her in prison for what she did. And the other part? I thought about that. The other part just wants it to be over. I want my life back. Your life was never really yours when you were married to her, Wheels pointed out. She spent 15 years trying to turn you into someone else. Maybe it's time to figure out who you actually are. Over the next hour, people kept approaching me to offer support, to share their own stories of betrayal and recovery, to tell me they'd always thought Arden was wrong for me. It was like the whole town had been waiting for permission to speak honestly about my marriage. The most surprising conversation came from an unexpected source, Janet, one of Arden's book club friends. She appeared at my table looking nervous and ashamed. Beck, could I talk to you for a minute? I gestured to the empty chair across from me. What's on your mind, Janet? I wanted to apologize for not speaking up sooner, for letting Arden say those things about you, for not telling you about the affair when I suspected something was going on. You knew? Not for certain, but there were signs. The way she talked about Mitch, the way she'd light up when his name came up, the way she started criticizing you more harshly after she started working with him. Janet twisted her hands in her lap, clearly uncomfortable. I told myself it wasn't my business, that maybe I was imagining things, but the truth is, I was afraid of her. We all were. Afraid of Arden? She had this way of cutting people down, of making you feel small if you crossed her. She knew everyone's secrets, everyone's weaknesses. Cross Arden, and suddenly your personal business became public knowledge. I thought about that, remembering how Arden's friends had always seemed slightly on edge around her, eager to please and quick to agree with whatever she said. She ruled through fear, I said. Exactly. And now that she's gone, people are finally talking about what she was really like. The cruel comments, the manipulation, the way she'd turn people against each other for her own amusement. Janet leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Beck, there are things you don't know, things she did that go way beyond the affair. Such as? The charity fundraiser last year, the one where $5,000 went missing from the accounts? That was Arden. She took the money to pay for her hotel stays with Mitch. I stared at her. You can prove that? I was the treasurer. I have all the records. I've been too scared to say anything, but with everything that's happened, I think people deserve to know the truth. As Janet left, I realized that Arden's downfall was revealing layers of deception I'd never suspected. The affair was just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath was a pattern of manipulation, theft, and cruelty that had touched dozens of lives. Saturday morning, I called Patricia with my decision. I want maximum penalties, I said. No plea deal, no concessions. I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Are you sure? This will mean a long public trial. Every detail of your marriage will be exposed. Good. Let everyone see exactly who she really is. Let there be consequences for her actions. And the divorce? Full fault-based proceedings. I want everything. The house, the assets, damages for emotional distress. I want her to understand that actions have consequences. Patricia was quiet for a moment. This is going to destroy her completely. Her career is already over, and criminal conviction will make it impossible for her to practice law anywhere. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? I thought about Arden calling me trash in front of her friends. I thought about months of mockery and planning behind my back. I thought about her breaking into my house to steal evidence of her own crimes. She destroyed herself, I said. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. The trial began 3 weeks later. The courthouse was packed with spectators, reporters, and lawyers who'd come to watch the downfall of someone they'd all known professionally. Arden sat at the defendant's table looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, her usual confidence replaced by obvious fear. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Security footage, witness testimony, digital evidence, financial records, everything painted a picture of calculated deception and criminal behavior. The defense tried to argue that Arden was a woman scorned, driven to desperate actions by an abusive husband. It fell apart when they called me to the stand. "Mr. Derron," the defense attorney said, "isn't it true that you controlled every aspect of your wife's life, that you monitored her communications and isolated her from her friends?" "No," I said calmly. "I worked 60 hours a week to support her career. I encouraged her friendships and never restricted her activities in any way." "But you did spy on her personal communications." "I discovered evidence of adultery on devices in my own home, devices I had every legal right to access as her husband and co-owner of the accounts." "And you used that evidence to humiliate her publicly?" I looked directly at Arden for the first time since the trial began. "I used that evidence to defend myself against false accusations. My wife chose to call me trash in front of witnesses. She chose to plan a new life behind my back. She chose to break into my house and steal evidence. I simply made sure the truth came to light." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Martinez sentenced Arden to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Arden collapsed into her chair, sobbing. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she looked back at me one last time. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear what she said over the noise of the crowd. I didn't need to hear it. I could read her lips well enough. "Trash," she mouthed. I smiled and mouthed back, "Winner." Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me with questions about the trial, the marriage, my plans for the future. I answered them briefly and politely, then walked to my truck and drove home. The house was quiet and peaceful, decorated now with furniture I'd chosen and artwork I actually liked. Arden's presence had been erased completely, replaced by a space that felt authentically mine for the first time in 15 years. I sat on the front porch with a beer, watching the sun set behind the oak trees my grandfather had planted. Tomorrow I'd start thinking about what came next. Maybe travel, maybe dating, maybe just enjoying the simple pleasure of living without constant criticism and manipulation. But tonight, I was content to sit in the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. Arden had called me trash and tried to throw me away. Instead, she'd thrown away everything that mattered: her career, her freedom, her reputation, her future. Sometimes the trash takes itself out. Sometimes it just takes a little help. And sometimes, just sometimes, the trash wins.